Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. Can everyone hear me? Am I clear? Okay, great. My name is Matthew Sabellis. I'm the Director of Live and Virtual Events here at Education Week, and I want to welcome you to EdElect 2016. That's hashtag EdElect 2016. That'll be relevant in just a minute. I'm looking forward to having a great day with you guys all here because you're going to, for all of you with cell phones, you're going to be able to do two different things. Number one, what I'm hoping you'll do is silence them. So be sure to silence your cell phones, but keep them out. We want you to be using the hashtag EdElect 2016, taking photographs of the folks that you're speaking with, the folks in the audience. You guys are as much experts here as the experts we've brought on stage here to be speaking with you today. We're hoping that you will be having a meaningful conversation because you'll be able to communicate who you're speaking with because of this postcard. Hopefully you all got this at registration. This postcard is going to walk you through who what their Twitter handles are, who's speaking at what point. All of these cards, again, are at the reg desk where you got your name tags. And if there are any volunteers in here, if you could bring some of those postcards into the room, and folks who are raising their hand can get postcards. So if this will, again, tell you the direction of the day and who's speaking on stage. You'll also see that on the screen behind. For those of you who are struggling with the Wi-Fi, this card, that's your Wi-Fi instructions, but also on this postcard it will tell you how to access the Wi-Fi in gross detail. I hope you'll enjoy that. It's a fun read. The bathrooms are located on the second floor. So those of you looking for the bathrooms, just go up the stairs to the second floor and walk over to the elevators and you'll find the restrooms. We'll try to get to as much Q&A as possible. Okay, we have a volunteer with postcards. Tess, if anybody needs the postcard, just raise your hand and Tess will get you that postcard. Thank you, Tess. Again, a question and answer. So we have my microphone here in the center, you'll see. We're going to throw to questions roughly 7 to 10 minutes before the end of each panel. We hope you'll raise your questions. We will get to as many as we can. We can't promise we'll get to everyone. Then I want to also take a moment here to thank everybody here at the Jack Morton Auditorium. This has been a great experience. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you so much, Danny, Mike. This has been a great morning, and we're really looking forward to getting this event kicked off and have a very successful afternoon with you all. So we're hoping for an engaging afternoon. Now I'd like to, let's get on with the day. Thank you so much, everyone.
And good afternoon again, and welcome to the Education Week and GW, Graduate School of Education, post-election experience. This is not just an event, it will be an experience. I'm Michele Givens, and I am the CEO behind the nonprofit publisher of Education Week. And I would like to talk to you about two things: fake news and surprise. But first, let me congratulate you for being here, whether you are live here at Morton Auditorium or you're joining us via the live stream. You have successfully navigated your way past fake news. We just came out of an election cycle in which false news was consumed as if true. Digital entrepreneurs discovered that we, the public, were eager for sensational stories. So maybe you remember the headline, "Pope endorses Trump," not true. And Hillary sold weapons to ISIS, also not true. Of course, if we go back in time, we know that sensationalism isn't new. Think yellow journalism. As James Fallows, one of our keynoters today, suggested 20 years ago in his book, Breaking the News, the realms of entertainment and the realms of news were becoming uncomfortably close. What was news this election cycle was the predominance of social media as primary quick distributors of our news. And the use of these platforms by questionable, sometimes foreign websites to distribute false and often sensational news stories. This would not have been a big deal just 4 years ago or during the last election cycle. We know from a study of news trends by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism that the biggest change in social media, or the biggest change, in digital media today is the use of social sites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat to access news. In this country, 46% of us, almost half of us, rely on social media for some of our news. And that's doubled since just 2013, just a few short years ago. The same Reuters study also suggested that credible news brands, think Education Week, are less recognized on social media. Only about 1/2 of us notice news brands when we're consuming information on social media platforms. So when we're relying on social media for our news, it's often very difficult to tell where it's coming from. I read yesterday that in the final 3 months of the US presidential election or campaign, the top performing fake election news stories on Facebook generated more engagement, it's more clicks, more reading, than the top stories from major news outlets, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post, and NBC News. That's quite a statement. And this is from a BuzzFeed news analysis. I think it's important at a time like this when we've elected leaders with different or even sometimes unknown philosophies, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, to be able to turn to reputable, informed sources of information about what's happening and what it means, where reporters follow their investigations to wherever the facts lead. We think, of course we're a little biased, but we think there's no better resource than the reporters and editors of Education Week to make sense of the uncertainty in K-12 education. We've been independently covering the space for more than 35 years. Before the election, we focused on the issues and not the horse races, and we continue to focus on the issues. And we report on them via events like this, on edweek.org, via our partnership with PBS NewsHour, and yes, even on Facebook and Twitter, and let's not forget print. We are still publishing Education Week in print. I also promised to talk to you about surprise. Immediately after the election, the Pew Research Center polled a national sample of voters. There was one thing that most Trump and Clinton supporters shared, one thing. Surprise at the outcome. Overall, 73% of voters said they were surprised that President-elect Trump won. In more ways than just this election cycle, our world is more surprising than ever. We have to develop the skills to handle the change and the uncertainty and all the innovations, threats, and opportunities that are around us. Those of us who can embrace surprise are most likely to use it as an opportunity. And I'd like to think, quite frankly, that's why we are here today. Certainly our goal at Education Week is to help improve public education by reporting on and explaining what's unfolding and what it might mean to those who depend on public education, which really is everybody. It's all of us in the United States, and especially how it will impact the success of students who deserve a good public education. We are looking for opportunity in change. So again, welcome to today's event. We're delighted that you're here. It's going to be a great ride ahead. And at this point, I'm happy to turn the stage over to our wonderful host, Dean Feuer from the GW Graduate School of Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Pleasure to be here with all of you. In case you didn't know in advance, I want to tell you that this is the original stage where Crossfire was produced. So what better venue to consider the issues that we're facing with regard to education and the future. I'm going to follow along Michelle's theme with the concept of surprise, and surprise my colleagues in particular by promising to be brief. Or as I think Jared Kushner said to Chris Christie, I won't keep you long. Let me make 4 really quick points in my few minutes up here. First, this co-hosting with our friends in Editorial Projects in Education and Education Week isn't coincidental, and it's not just a simple matter of somebody calling and saying, hey, do you want to do something with us? This is a reflection on something that I believe deeply, 2 things actually. First, that Education Week is really the go-to source for credible, objective, independent, and reliable information about education in the United States, in particular at the K-12 level. And over those number of years that Michelle mentioned, this organization has grown into something that those of us who are in this business really can't start a day or a week without. So it's an honor for us to be able to partner with Ed Week and with our colleagues there on the editorial side and on the reporting side. The related point is that these 2 institutions, George Washington University generally, our Graduate School of Education and Human Development specifically, at least for this afternoon, do share some very fundamental values, which is what makes this partnership so important for us. First, both of these institutions are in this business for the sake of the public good, by which we mean the production and interpretation and diffusion of knowledge that can serve the public interest. In the world of journalism, they go about that a little bit differently than in the halls of academe, but the underlying principles are really quite shared and in some sense similar. If you think about the phrase public education, well, of course, that's what a lot of us in the graduate school here are thinking about all the time. And if you think about a slightly different sort of punctuation of that phrase, the folks in Ed Week are thinking about how to educate the public. And so it's a different meaning of the phrase public education, but these things come together very nicely. Both institutions have an abiding sort of commitment to the use of data, and I don't just mean quantitative data, I mean data as in information, as in evidence, as it relates to the complexities of education. And we are in an era in which even the word partisan has taken on partisan connotations. I would say we are multi-partisan, neither nonpartisan nor bipartisan, we are multi-partisan. And certainly it is true that the George Washington University, like many institutions of higher learning in the United States, is committed to the principles of objective, multi-partisan scholarship, teaching, and knowledge. So this opportunity to share the stage with our friends in Ed Week is a blessing, and we are very grateful. I was going to, just add that institutions are great, but it's the people in them that actually make the difference. And we've had the great pleasure of working toward this event, toward this afternoon, with some of the finest and most talented people in the business from the Ed Week side. I just want to say a very special thank you to Elizabeth Rich, to Matthew Savellis, to Mark Baumster, and to the others in Ed Week with whom we have been able to work and put this thing together. From our side at GW, it's thanks to the literally tireless efforts of people on our staff in the ed school. Turan Waters, our communications director, Tess Cannon, Jenny Akune, Meg Holland, and others who really have been just totally great on all of this. My fourth point is actually something that I was kind of hoping that with all the sort of journalists in the room that I'd be able to give you a real scoop by saying that this election, the result was not what a lot of people expected. Now, how many of you have already gotten to that realization? But Michele pointed that out, and that is indeed what this is all about to a large extent. Among the consequences of the election, one was that many of the people who had signed up to participate in this forum had to rewrite all of their remarks starting on November 9th, which is, I suppose, a test of our agility and resilience and the capacity of our people to, take the new reality and work with it. And that's what we're doing. So it is a great pleasure to be able to have this event here on our campus. I know that my colleagues and bosses, President Steve Knapp and Provost Forrest Maltzman, and others in the central administration wanted me to share their appreciation and their thanks to Ed Week and to all of you for being with us. And we're in for quite an interesting afternoon. It is a great pleasure to welcome to the stage two people, one of them a member of the faculty of the School of Media and Public Affairs here at GW, and an expert on American electoral politics, a professor in that program, and the interim director of the program in media, Lara Brown, and with her, one of Ed Week's finest correspondents, Lisa Stark. So please welcome Lara and Lisa, and we'll get into the first round. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I went around the long way. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Lisa Stark with Education Week, and this is Dr. Lara Brown. She is an associate professor at GW and also the interim director of the Graduate School of Political Management. She's an author. She wrote Jockeying for the American Presidency, the Political Opportunism of Aspirants. So I'd say that's a pretty good topic for today. She also has a background in education. She worked for the education department under President Clinton, and so she might have some thoughts about that as well. And she describes herself as a flaming moderate. So she and I are going to chat for about the next 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for questions, so you can be thinking while we're talking. There is a microphone right in the middle that you can come to if you have a question, and my only request is that if you could really make it a question. I know everyone likes to pontificate, but we would prefer questions. So I'm going to start by saying that we were all surprised when we woke up on the day after the election, and I'm going to ask Lara to read the tea leaves for us and tell me how we got here.
Sure. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you to Ed Week and our Graduate School of Education and Human Development. This is a wonderful forum, and I'm so excited to get to be a part of this. So thank you for having me. I think the place to really start is actually to look much more deeply than where sort of the election returns kind of came out. I think when people ask me what is going on in our country, how did we end up with this result, the first place to really start is to explain that there have been really three different changes or trends that have been going on for quite some time. But they also kind of have different timelines, which make them, I think, rather interesting because they all kind of came together and crested at this moment. On the one hand, my short answer to everyone is essentially that this election was the realization or the flourishing of the three most cynical messages that were all created in the aftermath of Vietnam and Watergate and were put into movie form in the 1970s. So the movie Network, if you remember, everything was, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. The second message that came through was in the movie All the President's Men, which was about sort of Watergate and the uncovering of that. And that message was follow the money.
And you can't trust the government.
And you can't trust the government. And the third movie was The Candidate with Robert Redford, which is, what do we do now, right? There is this moment in time where literally all of those cynical thoughts about politics, about Washington, about how essentially what we do here works, kind of came together into a moment in which the entire country said, I'm mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, and a pox on all of your houses. And so Bernie Sanders did rise in the primary, and Donald Trump did essentially claim the presidency, mostly on the power of them being against the system. So I think that's a really important piece. Let me just also say that the longer story is a much more complex one. I'm somebody who does study our entire scope of American history. I spend a lot of time trying to understand ideological change within the parties, coalitional change within the parties, how presidential aspirants play the role in reflecting these kind of deeper changes. And the book that I'm working on right now actually compares the Gilded Age, which was a time frame from the 1870s. You can put it at 1872 or 1876, depending on how you want to think about it, leading up to about 1896. And I'm comparing that with our current time, what I'm calling the Global Age, which is really about this time frame from about 1992, essentially after the fall of the wall, to now, 2016. And when you look at these two time frames, what you see is that there is tremendous restlessness in politics. The two political parties go back and forth with quite a great deal of frequency. And the reason why is because neither party really has an answer to what is actually making the public so uncomfortable. And what is making the public so uncomfortable, both in that time and this time, is phenomenal change.
Economic change.
Economic transformation, massive dislocation of people. That time it was about us moving from agriculture to industry. This time it is about us moving from sort of industry into this digital global reality. And let me just say this one thing about that, because I think it's so important. If you think about what an auto mechanic's shop looks like today versus what it looked like just 25 years ago, you will have an understanding of what kinds of change we're talking about. Back 25 years ago, when you went into an auto mechanic shop, there was grease all over the floors. Everybody was like head to toe a mess. And usually there were a lot of parts everywhere. Nowadays, if you walk into the floor of an auto shop, it's pretty much clean, and your car, which is on a lift, is hooked up to 1 million computers. And no one is, in fact, really moving parts around, at least not in the same kind of mechanical way that we used to. And I think this is a huge part of the discomfort. We're being asked to change faster than human beings can comfortably change. Then there's a medium-term factor, and that's that the American public has basically been pretty upset with both political parties since 2005. And each political party has decided when they got into power that the public wasn't really upset with Washington or what the parties were doing. They were just upset with the other party. So what we've essentially seen is that in 2005, the Republicans, which had control of everything, went toward passing policies that were in favor of their base. Then the Democrats, when they got control in 2008, moved to a whole bunch of policies that were in favor of their base. And the American public went, hello, we're not really voting for you, we're voting against the other side.
So that brings us to today. And
So that brings us to today.
And you said, in a sense, the vote was a pox on both their houses. It wasn't really a
Absolutely.
Republican victory. It was, again, sort of voting against both parties in a way.
Yes.
So what happens now? We've got the Trump administration, and how does it move forward on domestic issues? What do you see as a possibility for this administration?
Well, I mean, this is where I think what's so interesting is that there is the possibility right now, because both parties have been cast out in very kind of inglorious fashions over the last decade, that perhaps both parties can in fact learn that the problem isn't just the other side, the problem is also within their own houses, and that maybe there's an opportunity to work together.
We've heard that so many times.
We have.
I'm a little cynical. I mean, I'd like to believe that you're correct, but what stars do you see that would align, that would allow them to work together?
I mean, I think the biggest alignment of stars is actually that I would argue that Paul Ryan is, in fact, even if you disagree with him on a whole host of issues, he is somebody who is a policy wonk, and he would much prefer to be a workhorse than a show horse. So that's a good sign. The other side of it is that Chuck Schumer, who is now essentially going to be the minority leader in the Senate, is a deal maker. And he is also somebody who's going to want to see things get done, because 2018 doesn't set up any better for the Democrats if they obstruct than essentially this year did for them. So I think one of the other issues is that both parties, since really Newt Gingrich won back Congress in 1994, they believed that obstruction would help them win back the majority. And the truth of the matter is, it has helped. They were able to basically obstruct. If you don't believe that the Democrats didn't obstruct in 2007 and 8 when they were in control of Congress and George W. Bush was in the White House, then you weren't really paying attention.
It's a bipartisan
It's a
obstruction.
bipartisan problem. Both of them believe this is how they win the majority, how they get all of it. But the thing is that now both parties have been burned by it. And the interesting part about both parties being burned by it is I do think they also realize that if they don't start producing some results, there's never going to be even a modicum of trust to, in fact, make your claims and win again.
So where do you see the policies that will be bipartisan? You say, okay, there are some stars that are aligned so that people will work together. What are they most likely to work together on generally? And then let's turn to education a little bit.
So I think generally there is an opportunity, which a lot of people have talked about, on the infrastructure bill. I mean, I think that's where everyone sees that the Republicans would like to do sort of, a reduction in corporate tax rates, and with that there would be a sort of one-time repatriation of dollars that are sitting overseas, and out of that would come about $240 billion is the estimate, which then essentially, certainly the Democrats, some Republicans, but definitely Donald Trump, would like to see spent on infrastructure. So there is an opportunity for something to move if essentially the House can be convinced that spending is not a bad thing. And they might be able to be convinced of that if they can reduce the corporate tax rates at the same time.
All right, so we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
What about education? We have a very interesting dynamic set up with the new education secretary. What is the significance of her pick, do you think, and where do you see education going under a Trump administration?
Well, let me just say, this is where Trump is actually very interesting. As a Republican, yes. I mean, one of the things you might remember is back in one of the early debates, he was asked, and this was the primary debates, he was in fact asked, what do you think are the top 3 priorities for the president? And his first one was security and defense, which makes complete sense. That's what you would expect nearly all presidents to say as their first pick. His second pick was actually education, and his third was healthcare. Now, I don't know any other Republican who would have assumed that the president should be doing healthcare and education at the federal level. Well, I'm just saying.
Well, he has also said that he
Right.
believes the state should be in charge of it.
And he does.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that he actually even puts it on his priority list. Many other Republicans would have argued that essentially it was something to do with the economy or something to do with setting the market, something to do with tax rates. I mean, it's
So
very
what is the
strange
significance,
that...
do you think, of him putting it on the list? I mean, not that you're in his head, I know, but I'm just wondering
Sure.
if you have any idea about that.
Well, I think what the interesting part is, what this actually suggests is, at some level, I think Donald Trump is much more interested, and has always been more interested, in being, if you will, a more domestic president than a foreign policy president. I don't think he necessarily realizes that presidents, kind of by virtue of the Constitution, are much more engaged in foreign policy on a daily basis than our states, who do actually a huge portion of what we call police powers within political science. But it's education, welfare,
Right.
and the health of its citizens. So it is interesting that Donald Trump somehow sort of thinks that being president means you get to be governor for the country. You know, and
How successful is he going to be at that? I mean, like in the area of education, he's talked about, you know, a $20 billion program for vouchers and school choice. He's clearly picked an education secretary who's very much believes in the marketplace, driving school change. Do you think they're going to be able to push forward that vision in any major way?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, this is where we will see sort of whether interest and desire kind of, you know, is able to trump, not to
No pun intended. Right.
use that phrase, but able to trump essentially institutions and inertia.
Right.
I mean, I do think we are in a very unique moment. It's not unique in our history, but it is unique in modern times. I would also argue, though, that George W. Bush, he expected to be the governor of the country. I don't think he ever expected to be a war president. 9/11 completely changed his agenda and also changed the power structure within the White House. Dick Cheney was able to take on much more of sort of a lead role after 9/11 than I think he would have ever been had 9/11 not occurred. So this is where presidents never really get the presidency they want. Life and events and the world changes too much. But I do think if Donald Trump is able to essentially be more of a governor for the country and able to leave sort of more of the foreign policy to the generals, we'll see, then I think there could be some movement in education that may not be such a bad thing, right? I think when I say that, what I mean is there may be some new energy and focus and interest in education that there hasn't been really since we have been at war.
I'm going to open it up for questions in 1 second after I have one. So if you have a question, feel free to line up at the microphone, and if not, we'll just keep talking. Let me ask you, you know, education has become so politicized.
Yes.
And you talked about the fact that that's one of the reasons you left education in a way. You didn't like the fact that it was becoming so politicized. And, you know, a number of years ago, you had Republicans and Democrats agreeing on things like No Child Left Behind. You had some standards and accountability. A lot of that has sort of shifted now. The pendulum has swung the other way. What do you see areas where both sides can agree in this political environment, or do you think it's going to continue to be as fractured as it is today?
Well, I mean, I do think it's fractured and I do think it's politicized, and it is true that, I mean, when I look back to when I was serving in the Clinton administration, there was a massive middle that was very interested in essentially really making sure that we had higher quality K through 12 education all across this country. You know, former Speaker John Boehner was on, you know, Workforce and Ed as the chair. There was a bipartisan really that grew out of the Southern Governors Coalition that was so interested in moving education, which included George W. Bush, but also Bill Clinton, you know, former Secretary Dick Riley, who was my boss, and of course, former Governor of North Carolina, Jim Hunt. Those were all really leaders in talking about standards, accountability, education reform, making sure that essentially blue ribbon schools really were blue ribbon schools. And this was really the impetus that led to No Child Left Behind. And what's so interesting to me about today's world is that while it has become politicized, I also see that politicization as being somewhat of a success of No Child Left Behind. Many people who worked on that hoped that what No Child Left Behind would do was essentially reveal many more of our issues in education than necessarily fix them. Part of the desire for some metrics were that when you started to look at the 16,000 school districts all across the country, you had no way to know who was doing well and who was doing poorly, or where we could target efforts and energy and funding.
It gave us all this data, basically,
and so
to work
it
with.
did gather and give us data. We may not be liking what we're seeing in the data, and some of the backlash, I think, is a part of that. And I also think there's been a horrible public affairs campaign against the idea of testing. And so I also think that there's a misinformation about metrics that is also part of the problem. And unfortunately, I would argue that misinformation campaign was led by essentially a coalition of the far right and the far left.
They came together on something, I guess, right?
They did. That didn't want to see any sort of higher standards.
For different reasons.
For different
yes, right.
reasons.
Let me, I see someone at the microphone. If you could identify yourself, please, and just
Yes.
ask your question.
I'm Susan Sclafani, and my question is that in terms of what was said in the debates about education, I took a lot of that to mean not only education in the K-12 range, but re-education for all of the people who are so unhappy because they don't have jobs, and they don't have jobs because they don't have education. So do you think that he's going to put a focus on education and retraining for these people who have been left behind by globalization?
It certainly would be my hope, because I do think that that's the only real solution.
It's such a democratic solution, though, isn't it? I mean,
It
the
is.
Republicans don't tend to like these words. I mean, as a whole, I know I'm being generalizing.
But this is partly where Donald Trump is interesting. He's not really a Republican. And I mean, he was a Democrat. He
actually socializes with Democrats.
And he also spent much of his time running for the Republican nomination by running against the Republican Party. Right. I mean, he did go against John McCain and George W. Bush and the war in Iraq. He did essentially argue that Republicans had been as much of the problem as the Democrats.
So do you think, I mean, his theme has been bring back manufacturing, which doesn't sound like a retraining agenda, but I'm wondering if you think maybe he would do something like that, or you think that would be on his
both
agenda?
parties keep arguing this. Okay. This is, I think, the great salvo of both parties. They keep saying, we're going to recreate manufacturing in the United States. One of the things that's fascinating to me is nobody seems to be blaming Silicon Valley. If you actually look at what is happening in terms of job loss, it is because of automation and digitization, not because of foreign trade or other people sort of moving manufacturing just because of the world economy. So much of what we're talking about is, my understanding from The Economist is that they said something like 2% a year of jobs are lost to automation and digitization. And over the course of a decade, that's a lot, right? 10 times 2 is 20%. We've lost a lot of jobs, and we're going to continue to lose a lot of jobs. The moment we have self-driving cars.
Or trucks.
Right. So this is where I would hope that we are. I mean, maybe the new retraining is everybody's going to have to learn to code. I don't know. But if that's the new basis for our economy, I think that that's going to be vitally important. And I imagine that whatever education policy, sort of goes forward, it's going to have to involve that. I think Josh Earnest said today or yesterday with regard to Donald Trump saving 1,000 jobs, he said something to the effect of, well, Donald Trump will have to do that 804 times in the next year to essentially do what this administration has accomplished in terms of growth in manufacturing jobs in the last year. So what we're really talking about is you can't just save what was. We have to prepare in advance for the new.
We're going to do one more quick question and then wrap it up, because unfortunately,
gosh.
I know, we never have enough time. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm Belinda Huang with the Higher Education Administration Program. And in that you're speaking about Donald Trump being sort of more domestically involved, I'm wondering how you see his policies for education, not just No Child Left Behind, but things like the Pell Grant and those federal policies, or is he going to reach down into state policies and tell the states what to do? Because there is considerable chatter about California wanting to be the refuge as opposed to other states. So please comment.
Well, I mean, in terms of sanctuary sort of schooling or those types of bills, I mean, I do think that, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal article that was out yesterday talking about sort of the new GAO report that looked at student loan programs. But it appears to me, as I'm reading this, that the Republicans are going to be very focused on cost of education. I think they always have been. I also think there is a reality that when you look at sort of the federal student loan money that goes to each and every university, I cannot imagine Donald Trump not trying to use that as some sort of bargaining chip in whatever policy he wants. So in other words, at some level, our university is going to be willing to risk their federal student loan dollars to not comply with another federal mandate. That is certainly something that I imagine is going to be on the table, will be discussed. I think education sort of has an assumption embedded in it that all that we do is always good, and it's okay that it keeps costing more. And
As the parent of a college student, I kind of have to disagree.
And I mean, I just think that there is going to have to be some understanding of this. I mean, I spend all of my time as an interim director of a graduate school working with students and talking to them about how can we figure out to get somebody else to pay for your education, because I do not want you to take a student loan. I don't want you to do it. I want you to find a way to get a scholarship, to get your employer to pay for this work. I want you to work with us and with you to make sure that you don't walk out of this school with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So, I mean, with that, I would just say, I think this is something that we as an education community have to be committed to, and have to be committed to thinking about how do we ensure the future of our students by ensuring that they aren't just in debt.
And I'm just going to ask you to wrap it up, to look ahead, and I know that you have some thoughts on, kind of a kumbaya moment, how we should all come together here, and what do you think is the answer to sort of move the country forward?
I will tell you that the most disturbing piece of information to me that I have read probably in the last 4 or 5 years was a Pew study that basically said activist partisans are more fearful that somebody in their family will marry somebody from the other party than they are that that person would marry somebody from another race, another religion, another part of the country, or another country altogether. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, so the look who's coming to dinner is now the, woo, it's the other side. And yet what's so bizarre about that fact is when you actually look at political ideology in the United States, we haven't really changed. We have only slightly become more liberal overall as a country, but we are generally still a center-right country. And yet the partisan labels and the partisanship has become so awful. I mean, one of my favorite statistics from Pew Study said that 70% of activist Democrats believe that Republicans are closed-minded. Okay, most Democrats I know like to think of themselves as open-minded. Well, it's not very open-minded of you to believe that all Republicans are closed-minded. So here's the problem, like until we actually are willing to listen to each other as human beings, I just don't know how we're actually going to get out of this moment. And the kind of judgments about the rural-urban divide, about the educated, not college-educated divide, about all of sort of the difficulties that different groups and different people are facing, I mean, at some level, we do have to realize that we are all in this together. And we can keep fighting each other, but the fights aren't really going to move us forward. So at some level, you have to take a lesson from all of your diplomacy classes, which is you start from the place of where do you agree instead of where you disagree.
All right, we're going to have to stop there, which is a great place to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for listening, and we'll bring out the next panel.